Akiyuki Nosaka was born in Kamakura in 1930. His mother died shortly after giving birth to him, and his father cut himself off from him by sending him to live with his aunt in the town of Kobe. By 1945, Japan had lost the war, and the U.S. would constantly bomb cities and towns until Emperor Hirohito would officially announce his country's surrender. The town of Kobe was bombed in June of that year. Nosaka's uncle died in the process, while his aunt was badly injured. Nosaka ran away with his 2-year-old sister. However, he was unable to take care of her, and she passed away 2 months later. Nosaka was eventually caught stealing and sent to a juvenile detention center in Tokyo, where he remained until his biological father reclaimed him. In 1967, Nosaka wrote about the experience in a semi-autobiographical short story, which we all know today as Grave of the Fireflies. The story of 2 siblings, Seida and Setsuko, who are left to survive on their own during the final months of World War II. Nosaka originally wrote the story in the hopes of finding inner peace within himself over the traumatic experience and the guilt of failing his little sister. Grave of the Fireflies soon became required reading for Japanese schoolchildren. The story even won the Naoki Prize for Literature later that year. Offers began pouring in to turn Grave of the Fireflies into a live-action movie, but none of them came to pass. Nosaka argued that it was impossible to recreate the scorched earth that was to be the backdrop of the story. Plus, he doubted that the children of present day would be able to capture the right emotions of the 2 main characters. Finally, in 1987, the story's publisher, Shinchosha, sold the rights to a film studio. But to Nosaka's surprise, the studio that bought the rights specialized in animation. The buyer was the newly established company Studio Ghibli, founded by Hayao Miyazaki, Isao Takahata, and Toshio Suzuki in 1985. It was decided that Isao Takahata would direct the film. Takahata was born in the city of Ujiyamada in 1935. Today, the city is known as Ise. When he was 9 years old, his family was living in Okayama when the U.S. bombed it at the end of June of 1945. Terrified beyond belief, Takahata was able to flee barefoot in his pajamas with only one of his older sisters. They returned after things had calmed down and saw the piles of dead bodies in the streets. Thankfully, the rest of his family had survived as well by hiding in an air raid shelter in their garden. Takahata and his sister were reunited with them the very next day, but to Takahata, it was not a joyous occasion. He recalled that he showed little emotion other than giving his mother a smile of embarrassment. Since Takahata was old enough to remember the bombings firsthand, he seemed like the perfect choice to direct. He explained in an interview that he was compelled to adapt Grave of the Fireflies to animation after reading how the character of Seida was a unique wartime 9th grader. Nosaka visited Studio Ghibli and was convinced that animation was the right genre for Fireflies after he saw the storyboards. It's just the way it was, from the rice paddies in the background to the townscape. That wouldn't be possible filming on location in live action. I've looked for a photo of that place from that time period, but I've yet to find it. So when I saw his sketch a few minutes ago, I was surprised how faithfully it was rendered. Grave of the Fireflies was officially released on April 16, 1988, double packaged with Miyazaki's new film, My Neighbor Totoro. I'm going to be honest. I've avoided watching Grave of the Fireflies my whole life. Why? Because everyone keeps telling me how emotionally moving it is and how it brings tears to their eyes. Now, I haven't avoided this movie because I don't want to feel emotional. I love it when a movie makes me feel the emotions that were expected. The problem is that this movie has been praised to death, and I was afraid that when the time finally came that I would sit down and watch it for myself, it wouldn't live up to the hype. So, finally, I forced myself to watch it for this review. And I was right. To a certain extent, anyway. Don't get me wrong, the movie did tug at my heartstrings at times, but it didn't have the emotional impact on me that I think was intended. That's not the movie's fault, though. It's the fan base's doing. all the praise about this movie that I've heard about over the years, the way people talk about it, I was actually expecting it to feel my eyes burning red, at the very least, with the possibility of tears. But no, I do think this movie is very well done, and I can see why many consider it Takahata's masterpiece. I guess my emotional expectations were just too high. I do care for Seita and Setsuko. I just want to see them make it through this trauma and have life cut them a break for once. It's brutally honest and heartbreaking. Setsuko especially, I think, is the true gem of the film. Just hearing her voice is enough to make your heart melt. By the way, hats off to her American voice actress Emily Neves. She is so believable as this little infant that I actually thought that the production crew brought in a real child actor to voice that role, like they did with siblings Dakota and Elle Fanning for My Neighbor Totoro. One part that blew me away was the amount of bodies that the film showed. It's nothing revolutionary by today's standards, but this came out in 1988. To my recollection, this is the earliest animated film I've seen that shows dead bodies, whereas in the US, Disney waited another 6 more years before taking the leap to show one dead body in The Lion King. But even then, it's a clean body with no injuries to be seen, and it was an animal. Takahata and his crew went out of their way with this film to show even the tiniest gruesome details. Burnt flesh, the maggots, and even the image of a body of a child is focused upon much longer than I think the audience was comfortable with. I can definitely see why people love this film, and I'm sure I will watch it again someday. Who knows? Maybe the more times I watch it, my barriers will finally start to cease and I will begin to feel the emotions that everyone else felt. That actually seems to be happening a lot more these days. I'm actually finding myself beginning to choke up more at various movies, even though some of them I have seen multiple times in the past. It's a weird feeling, but I welcome it. Maybe someday this will be one of those films as well. Despite Nosaka's argument that a live-action attempt was impossible, 2 adaptations were released in the first decade of the new millennium. A TV version in 2005, with the story being told from the point of view of Seita and Setsuko's aunt, and another theatrical film was released in 2008. Ironically, both seem to draw inspiration from the animated version, which shows just how iconic the 1988 adaptation is. This is the version that time will remember. And I do think that not only is this a great animated film, but one of the most important films in general that audiences can ever see. I'm going to give Grave of the Fireflies 5 stars. Guys, thank you so much for continuing to watch my videos. It really means a lot to me. And stay tuned for my next Ghibli review in August for Ghibli's first official film, Castle in the Sky. And if you like this, you can click here and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.